Welcome to the Health Headliner podcast by Tudu Digital. Our content is informational only and not medical advice. Please consult your provider. Now, let's dive into today's headlines.
Okay, let's unpack this. It's a thought, that hits many of us, often around our 40s or maybe 50s. Maybe you've noticed the scale creeping up a bit, or you just feel like, okay, it's time to make a change for your health.
Yeah, that feeling is very common.
And then this big question comes up, can I still make a real, a long-term difference at this age? Is it sort of too late? Or could even a modest change now actually pay off decades from now?
That's the core question, isn't it? People wonder if the habits they formed or maybe haven't formed mean things are pretty much set by midlife.
Exactly. So today we are taking a deep dive into some really fascinating new research that looks right at this specifically, the long-term health impact of weight changes that happen during middle age.
And we're drawing insights from a recent health news article, but also critically, we're digging into the actual scientific paper it's based on. It was published in JAMA Network Open.
Right. Our mission really is to cut through the noise, unpack what this important study found, and figure out what this research really means for your health, years, even decades down the road.
Trying to pull out those key takeaways, maybe some surprising details too.
Yeah, so to get it, we first need to understand the study itself, right? What kind of research was this?
Well, it wasn't a short experiment or anything like that. This was a large, long-running cohort study.
Okay, cohort study. So that means following a big group of people over a really long time.
Exactly. Observing how different factors, like weight change in this case, relate to health outcomes over many, many years.
And the scale here sounds pretty impressive.
Oh, it is. Researchers pulled together data from nearly 23,000 adults. And not just from one place.
Right.
It combined data from three really well-known long-term studies, the Whitehall 2 study in the UK,
Okay.
and then two from Finland, the Helsinki Businessmen Study, and the Finnish Public Sector Study. Some of this data, believe it or not, goes way back to the 1960s.
Wow, the 60s. That's incredible perspective. So what was the specific focus with all this data?
And they look specifically at how people's body mass index, or BMI, how that changed during their midlife years, so roughly between the ages of 40 and 50.
Okay, and maybe we should quickly define body mass index, BMI.
Good idea. Yeah, it's basically an estimate of body fat calculated from your height and weight. It's used a lot.
Widely used, yeah. Although, as I think we'll get into, it's maybe not a perfect measure.
Definitely not perfect, but it's the measure they used here. And they categorize people into four groups based on their BMI at two different points during that midlife period.
Okay, what were the groups?
All right, so first you have the group who maintained a healthy weight the whole time that's defined as a body mass index below 25.
Got it. Healthy weight maintainers.
Then a really interesting group, those who started out overweight, meaning a body mass index of 25 or more, but then lost weight and got into that healthy BMI range by the second measurement.
Okay, so they successfully lost weight, went from overweight to healthy. What else?
Then the opposite. People who started in the healthy BMI range, but gained enough weight to cross into the overweight category.
Right, the weight gain group.
And finally, the fourth group were those who were in the overweight BMI category at the first check-in, and were still there at the second one. They remained overweight.
Okay, four distinct paths. And they looked at people who were generally healthy before these changes.
Yes, that's a crucial point. They focused specifically on individuals who were free, or mostly free, of major chronic diseases at the start of this midlife assessment.
Why was that so important?
Well, they wanted to try and isolate the impact of the weight change itself on developing diseases later, rather than confusing it with, say, weight loss that might happen because someone is already sick.
That makes a lot of sense. So you've got these nearly 23,000 people, data going back decades. How do they track what actually happened to their health over such a long time?
That's where things like national health registries come in. They were able to link the study participants' data to these official health records and also to death records.
So they could see who developed which chronic diseases or who passed away.
Exactly. And over a very long follow-up, in one of the groups, they had data stretching out for up to 35 years after that midlife assessment.
35 years? That's a really long time horizon.
It is. And it's key to the findings.
And there's another really important piece of context here, isn't there, about how people might have lost weight back then?
Absolutely. Critical point. The weight changes they measured in this study happened mostly before things like modern weight loss drugs or bariatric surgery were widely available or commonly used.
So if people lost weight, especially moving from overweight down to a healthy BMI.
It strongly suggests it was achieved through lifestyle changes,
Mhm.
modifications to diet, increases in physical activity, that sort of thing.
Right. This isn't really a study about meds or surgery. It's more about the impact of lifestyle-driven weight changes.
Precisely. Which makes the findings even more relevant for many people today thinking about lifestyle approaches.
Okay, so that brings us to the results, the big payoff. After tracking all these people for so long, what did the study reveal?
This is where it gets really compelling, answering that question you posed at the start. The main finding is pretty clear. Compared to the people who stayed overweight through midlife,
Yeah.
those who successfully lost weight, going from an overweight body mass index down to a healthy one, saw really significant long-term health benefits that stretched out over those following decades.
Okay, significant benefits. How much weight loss are we talking about? Was it drastic?
That's one of the interesting parts. The Health News article covering the study highlighted that losing just about 6.5% of body weight on average was linked to these positive outcomes.
6.5%. So like you mentioned
Yeah.
in the outline, for someone, say, 180 pounds, that's less than 12 pounds.
Exactly. It's not necessarily about massive weight loss. It's more about that shift from the overweight category into the healthy body mass index range, even if it's relatively modest.
And the benefits weren't just one thing, right? The paper showed a lower risk for quite a range of conditions.
Oh yeah, pretty broad benefits. They found a lower risk for major chronic diseases, including cardiovascular diseases, so think heart attacks and strokes,
Okay.
certain types of cancer, asthma, and also lung diseases like chronic obstructive pulmonary disease or COPD.
Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, got it. And they made sure this wasn't just because weight loss helps with diabetes risk, because those two are often linked.
That's right. They specifically ran analyses where they excluded the impact on diabetes, and they still found a significantly lower risk for these other major conditions and for cardiovascular problems.
Wow.
And maybe most importantly, those who made that shift from overweight to healthy BMI in midlife had a lower risk of dying from any cause during that very long follow-up period compared to those who remained overweight.
Okay, that's pretty powerful. So let's circle back to that question people ask in their 40s or 50s. Is it too late for me?
This research really suggests the answer is no, it's not too late.
It seems like even a relatively modest weight loss, probably achieved through lifestyle changes back then, in your 40s or 50s, can substantially lower your risk of major diseases and dying prematurely, potentially decades later.
It really paints midlife as this crucial window of opportunity. Positive changes made then seem to have these profound lasting effects on not just your lifespan, how long you live, but also your health span, the number of healthy years you enjoy.
That is incredibly encouraging, really hopeful news. But, like with all scientific studies, we need to talk about the limitations, the nuances.
Absolutely, always important.
What were the main ones discussed in the sources?
Well, a big one is that this is an observational study. They watched what happened. They didn't tell one group to lose weight and another not to, like in a randomized trial.
Right.
So while they found this strong link, this association between midlife weight loss and better health outcomes later.
It can't definitively prove that the weight loss alone caused all the benefits.
Exactly. It's very likely that the lifestyle changes leading to the weight loss, like perhaps eating healthier foods, exercising more, also played a really significant role in those better health outcomes. And it's hard to completely separate those effects in this kind of study.
That makes sense. The weight loss and the healthy habits probably go hand in hand. What about the measure they use, body mass index? We touched on that.
Yeah, both the study authors themselves and the experts quoted in the news article point out that body mass index, or BMI, has limitations. It's not a perfect reflection of health risk.
Because it doesn't tell you about body composition, right? Like how much is muscle versus fat.
Exactly. Or, crucially, where that fat is stored. Things like visceral fat, the fat around your organs, is thought to be particularly harmful, and BMI doesn't directly measure that. As one expert said, there are just so many variables in body composition that BMI alone doesn't capture.
Okay. And did they know for sure why people lost weight? Was it always intentional?
They couldn't confirm that for every single person. However, the researchers argue that because this group was relatively healthy to begin with, in midlife, any weight loss was most likely intentional, driven by lifestyle changes.
As opposed to, say, older or sicker people where unintentional weight loss might be a sign of illness.
Precisely. They try to distinguish it from that scenario, which has been studied elsewhere. But still, it's an assumption, not a certainty for everyone.
Got it. And who was actually in the study? Did the sources mention the demographics?
They did. The participants in these 3 cohorts were primarily of white European descent.
Okay, so that means we need to be a bit cautious about applying these exact findings universally to all ethnic groups.
Yes, that's a standard limitation. Health patterns and responses can differ across populations, so generalizability might be limited. The findings are strongest for people with similar backgrounds to those studied.
Right. And one last thing, how the data was collected. Was it all consistent?
There was some variation. In 2 of the studies, the initial weight measurements were done by health professionals, which is ideal.
Okay.
But for later measurements in one study and all measurements in another, they relied on people self-reporting their height and weight.
And self-reports can sometimes be a little inaccurate.
They can be, yeah. There might be slight errors.
Yeah.
However, the key finding that benefit of moving from overweight to healthy BMI in midlife was consistent across all 3 of these different cohorts.
So even with slightly different data methods, the main result held up across the board.
Exactly. That consistency really strengthens the confidence in the overall conclusion, despite those minor data variations.
That's reassuring. So even with those limitations acknowledged, the message seems pretty robust. What did the experts cited in the sources have to say about the study's importance?
Well, Dr. Timo Strandberg, who is the lead author on the paper, he acknowledged that, yes, correcting overweight in midlife without today's medical options is certainly challenging.
No doubt.
But he emphasized that the results show it is feasible, people did achieve it, and importantly, that it may be associated with decreased long-term risk. It validates making that effort.
It shows it's possible and worthwhile. What about other experts?
Dr. Ayush Vazaria, a clinical researcher quoted in the news piece, called the study important. He pointed out that it provides really valuable evidence linking this kind of lifestyle-driven weight loss specifically to cardiovascular disease and overall death rates over the long term.
An area he felt needed more research.
Yeah, he felt that specific link hasn't been studied enough, particularly with such a long follow-up period. He also agreed on the point about body mass index being imperfect, just reinforcing that nuance we discussed.
And thinking about that long follow-up, that seems to be a recurring theme, a major strength here.
Absolutely. The paper itself talks about this. Many previous studies, even randomized trials looking at lifestyle changes, often had shorter follow-ups, maybe just a few years.
And they didn't always find clear benefits for things like heart attacks or mortality.
Right. The results were often mixed or inconclusive. What this study, and another long-term one mentioned from China, the De King study, suggests is, well, it simply takes time.
Time for the benefits to show up clearly.
Exactly. It seems the health benefits of making these positive changes in midlife, especially regarding major diseases and mortality, they accumulate slowly and only become really apparent over many years, even decades.
So the payoff isn't necessarily immediate, but it's a significant long-term investment in your future health.
That seems to be the key message.
Okay, so let's try and wrap up this deep dive. The really compelling takeaway seems crystal clear, doesn't it? Based on this large long-term research. Losing even a relatively modest amount of weight in your middle years, your 40s, your 50s, likely through lifestyle changes like diet and exercise, appears to have a substantial payoff.
Yeah, a big payoff in terms of reducing your risk for major diseases and potentially adding years to your life decades down the line.
It really answers that question we started with. Midlife is definitely not too late to make changes that can profoundly impact your future health.
Absolutely. It's a message of hope, I think.
And if people are listening and wondering, okay, what can I actually do based on standard expert advice like that mentioned in the article?
Yeah, the recommendations are usually pretty consistent.
It often comes down to aiming for those simple, established goals, right? Like trying to get about 150 minutes of moderate exercise a week.
Right, things like brisk walking, cycling, something that gets your heart rate up a bit.
And adding maybe 2 days of muscle strengthening activities, plus focusing on a nutrient-rich diet.
Like the Mediterranean style, perhaps.
Yeah.
Lots of fruits, vegetables, nuts, olive oil, that kind of pattern.
Exactly. And it's important to remember these lifestyle foundations are crucial, even if someone is also using medications or other interventions as part of their health plan.
That's a great point. Lifestyle supports everything else. And the lead researcher, Dr. Strandberg, also made a point about society's role.
Oh, yeah. What was that?
Just a reminder that it's not all on the individual. Society needs to help make healthy choices easier. Things like ensuring access to affordable, healthy food, creating safe environments for physical activity.
That's true. Individual effort is key, but the environment we live in matters a lot too.
Definitely.
Okay, so here's a final thought to leave you with, something maybe to chew on after this discussion.
Right.
If a relatively small change in weight achieved back in your 40s or 50s can echo through your health all the way into your 70s, 80s, maybe even beyond, what does that tell us about the sheer cumulative power, the long-term impact of consistent positive health habits, not just in midlife, but maybe pursued across the entire life course?
It really suggests that those small, steady steps we take today can build up, compound over time, creating a path towards much better health, not just tomorrow, but for decades to come. It's quite profound when you think about it that way.
It really is. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the long-term impact of midlife weight change. We really hope unpacking this research has been valuable and maybe sparked some thoughts.
Yeah, it's been fascinating to discuss. We look forward to sharing our next deep dive with you all soon.
Thanks for tuning in to the Health Headliner podcast by To Digital. Like and subscribe for more health news and breakthroughs. Stay healthy and informed. See you next time.